In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
Welcome back to another edition of the Daily Memphian's Memphis Grizzlies podcast. This is your host, Grizzlies writer Drew Hill, joined as always by columnist Chris Herrington. It's been a week. We took a week off, but we're back. We have some news since we took a week off, Chris. We finally, I think, got some clarity in the different pathways forward for the Grizzlies this offseason. It's been a minute, so maybe it's a little old, but I think we need to take some time to talk about the Jaren Jackson Jr. exclusion from the All-NBA teams. And then also we have a finals matchup. We've got the draft coming up. We've got several things that we can get into. But let's start there. Let's start with the Jaren stuff. So obviously the All-NBA teams come out. He did not make the list, did not make the cut for the third team. It was close, as we all thought. But he was left off of the list. And obviously there's going to be a lot of fallout, right, from that. And we've been talking about these two different pathways forward for Memphis and what they might look like. But you wrote the story, so I'll let you do the recap. Why don't you just give us the big picture of what this means for the Grizzlies here?
Well, let's start with the note on not making All-NBA. It was not surprising. I think a lot of people thought, I definitely thought and expressed he would be somewhere in that 14 to 17 range, last two in, last two out, that he was going to be in that range. And he was 17th. James Harden, who was the last guy in, got 68 total vote points. And then the next two guys out, Alperen Sengun of Houston and Jaren Jackson, got 58 and 55. So that's really close.
Yep.
I think, though, the non-positional ballot really screwed over the big men, both on all NBA and also matters less, but on all defense, where like guards got the majority of the slots there, at least on first team, when big men are more important defensively. And then on all NBA, guards also, if you think about two guards on a 5-man basketball team, that should be 6 guard spots. And instead you've got Shea, Donovan Mitchell, Edwards, Curry, Brunson, Cade, Halliburton, Harden. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. That's 8 instead of 6. That's 8 guards made All NBA. I'm not even including Jalen Williams, who's a small forward. 8 guards made All NBA instead of the 6 if you're going positional. And I personally thought that not only was Jaren more deserving than James Harden, I thought Alperen Sengun was more deserving than James Harden, and I even thought that his teammate Vika Zubac for the Clippers was more deserving. And frankly, I thought Darius Garland, another guard, was more deserving. I think the Harden thing was name recognition, and then the fact that the Clippers finished 2 games better than the Grizzlies. But I think that was a bad beat for the bigs, a bad beat for Jaren. In terms of transitioning to what it means contract wise, and we've talked about this a bunch already, but the big picture there is that he did not qualify for Supermax eligibility. Now, it's not Newitt's review. That's both about the size of a contract he could get and when he could get it, right? And so the Supermax enables you to get up to 35% of the salary cap in the first year of a 5-year contract. It has to be at least 30. It can be as much as 35%. And the other key thing is you can sign it now, even though it doesn't kick in until after the following season. And so in missing All NBA, he is not eligible for that contract, which both lowers the amount of money he can get, but it also changes sort of, how you can do a contract. Because you couldn't sign him to a regular max, that would only start a year from now. And so the only way to extend him, if the Grizzlies want to do it this summer, is to build it off the current contract. Jaren Jackson's contract is below market value for him. It was designed that way to decline year by year. So it's $23.4 million next summer. So to build an extension off of that contract, the maximum you can give a player to extend a contract is a 40% raise in the first season of the extension. And then you build out lower raises on top of that. And so a contract for Jaren that would be, and I should have all the numbers in front of me, which I don't. A contract for Jaren under his current contract at $23.4 million, if you build an extension off of that, is going to be too low. I mean, you could read what I wrote, but let's see. So $23.4 million. That would mean a maximum extension of $147 million for 4 years, which is a lot of money. But the Supermax is going to be 350.
Yeah, relative,
over
it's
five,
not a lot of money.
Over 5, and his regular max would be 300 million over 5. And so if the Grizzlies want to try to offer Jaren Jackson an extension this summer, and we both believe that they do, they're going to have to do what is called a renegotiate and extend. And so it's still the same principle. You have to build the extension off the current contract, but you can change the current contract and thus change the extension. And so the most money the Grizzlies could offer Jaren Jackson on an extension next season would be $51 million, which would be his regular max. No matter how much cap room you carve out, you can't offer more than a $51 million salary in the 2026-2027 season right now, because that is the max. Not the super max, but the regular max. So that's the most money you can offer that season. To get to that number on a 140% raise off the current contract, you need to increase the current contract by my math, about $13 million. They currently have close to $7 million in cap space, or would have close to that without having to do anything meaningful. And so to boost that from $7 million in cap space to $13 million in cap space, 13 to 14 million, you're going to have to clear another 6 or 7 million in cap space off your books. There are multiple ways that could happen, but the most obvious ways that could happen would be to try to disappear John Konchar's contract, which is $6.2 million. And then if you need more money on top of that, which they might, the next easiest contract to disappear is probably the Jay Huff, which is $2.3 million next season. And so it seems likely what the Grizzlies will do this summer. Again, we're not reporting, it's not definite, but what seems likely that the Grizzlies will do this summer is to try to move one or both of those salaries off of their books, either completely or mostly, in order to increase their cap space, and then to give that cap space to Jaren Jackson Jr. in a raise. And then once they've given him the raise, to give him a 4-year extension off of that new contract. And that seems to be what the Grizzlies will try to do this summer. I just threw a lot of stuff out there so you can try to pick it apart and make it more digestible for the listeners.
So, yeah, let me just bring up a couple other things. So, I'm going to ask you these questions as if I don't know the answers, but I think these are questions people might have. What does this mean for the players that are going to be free agents? Like, what does this mean for Kennard and Bagley and Lamar Stevens?
So the Grizzlies have, coming out of last season, the Grizzlies have 3 players who were headed into unrestricted free agency and 1 player headed into restricted free agency. The unrestricted free agents, the 3 guys you mentioned, Kennard, Bagley, Stevens. Those guys have, and Stevens is a little bit different. Stevens is actually not as important in this, but Bagley and Kennard in particular have what are called cap holds, which means there's a dollar figure attached to them on the books until you either sign them, they sign somewhere else, or you renounce your rights to them. In order for those cap holds to go away, the Grizzlies would have, one of those 3 things would have to happen. And so what that really means is Grizzlies will have to renounce the rights to those players. Now, renouncing the rights to a player does not mean you're not allowed to sign the player. It means you have no special rights. The player is no longer treated as your free agent. He's just a free agent for the whole league, and you have no more right to him than anyone else. And so what that would effectively mean for a Kennard or a Bagley is that the Grizzlies would not have what are called bird rights, which is named after Larry Bird, which is a mechanism that allows you to go over the cap and re-sign in your own player. So that would no longer apply to those guys. So if they wanted to sign those guys, they would be no different from any other free agent on any other team. And so I think the Grizzlies, even if they might want to bring Bagley back, which I think they've left the door open for that, Kennard less so, they're going to renounce the rights of those players to clear the cap space. So that's the first step. Now, your restricted free agent, Santi Aldama, it's a little bit different story. First of all, you have to extend what's called a qualifying offer to make him a restricted free agent, which we all expect the Grizzlies will do. Once he becomes a free agent, a restricted free agent, he is a cap hold too, which is $11 million. That money is on the books in lieu of cap space is the cap hold. And you have rights for him. You have restricted rights for him, meaning you can match offers that other teams make. Now you could renounce your rights to Santi Aldama and make him a free agent just like any other free agent in the league. But and remove that $11 million cap hold, which would take care of your money problem in a hurry. But you don't want to let go of those restricted rights on Santi, both because that makes it pretty much impossible you're going to re-sign him, and also you have no leverage in case there are trade possibilities with him. So they're not going to do that. That is the last resort situation. And so when I say they have about $7 million in cap space, that is assuming they renounce their rights to the three unrestricted guys we talked about, but that is assuming they maintain their rights to Santi Aldama.
How does this change? I think maybe we can even simplify it more in terms of like, well, first of all, we should talk about this because I think there might be people based on the way he performed in the playoffs wondering if Jaren is worth
Yeah,
giving an extension like this. Like that's part of this conversation. Now we're operating under the assumption, not reporting, as you said, we don't know that this is going to happen, but like that is a big commitment to a player, right? I think there are questions about whether or not that's a deal that the Grizzlies should do.
It is. I would say, this guy just finished 17th in the All NBA vote, and that's after a big slide at the end of the season. Everyone thought he was going to be second team at one point in the season. So this is a guy who, there's a real argument he's a top 20 player in the league. He's won even before this season. He's made two All-Star teams. He's won Defensive Player of the Year. He's made multiple All Defensive teams. He's also 25 years old.
Yeah, that's the other part. That's the part that I think gets forgotten.
Yeah.
He's 25 years old and he just made a very big offensive leap. Like what's yeah.
He's a 25-year-old who can play both power forward and center, who can anchor a team defense and is a 20-point scorer in the league. And there just aren't a lot of those guys in the league.
No.
And even if you don't like the rebounding or you wish the playoff numbers were greater than were, you start looking around the league, there aren't a lot of guys like that. Now, if it were the Supermax, I think that's a different discussion because I don't think that contract is made for Jaren Jackson's of the world. I think it's made for the Giannis Antetokounmpo's, Nikola Jokic's. But when you're talking about that lower max number, that's a big contract, but it's a contract I think just about any team in the league would give him. I think if he goes into unrestricted free agency a year from now in 2026, where more teams have cap space, I think that number, the number we're talking about the Grizzlies trying to get to this summer on a renegotiating extend, I think that contract is there for him from other teams in the league. And so your question for the Grizzlies is, if you don't want to pay Jaren that money, like how are you spending it? Like how are you replacing that guy? I just don't think you are. And even if you think it's a little bit of an overpay, the cap's going to start going up a lot, right? It's going to be going up 10% for the foreseeable future. The raises for players are only 8%. So the cap's going to be increasing at a faster rate than your raises. And again, to the point we made, this guy's 25-year-old two-way player who multi-positional player. And the downside with a player like that is very low, right? Like you're barring some kind of injury situation, he's been the most durable guy on the team the last few years. You're getting a strong return. Now, you get in a return that's all the way at the max of the contract. That's a real question, but you're getting a really, really good player in his prime years. And so I just don't see the team not wanting to be in business with Jaren Jackson Jr. even at that salary level.
Yeah, and I think you and I probably are some of the more positive proponents that have been of Jaren. And if it doesn't mean he hasn't had his struggles, which he has. But I also just look at it and, like you said, where are you spending that money otherwise is a very good question. And the other thing is, if you let's say the Grizzlies did want to make a trade, you just mentioned his contract isn't high enough right now to just give him an extension off of what he's got, which means he's more valuable than his current contract, which means trading him is that much more difficult to do because the matching becomes challenging if you're going to get any sort of a return that you feel like is at least going to, be a lateral move. So I'm with you. Like it just seems like this is where the Grizzlies are and what the Grizzlies are going. It seems like this is what they're going to do because it makes the most logical sense.
Yeah, no, we're talking about what the Grizzlies want to do, right? The other question out there is what Jaren wants to do.
Yeah.
And that's even though we're having to do some educated guesswork on what the Grizzlies want to do, I think the guesswork is stronger on the Jaren side. Even though he did say, I think in response maybe to your question on media day, that he wants to stay in Memphis, right? He did say that. That said, even if the Grizzlies can move stuff around to get to the biggest offer they are allowed to make this summer, which once you factor in the raise would be more money over 4 years than they can offer him next summer, which is already more money than anyone else could offer him next summer. It's still not as much as the Grizzlies could offer him next summer because they could give him a 5th year, which they can't give now. And it's certainly not as much as the potential Supermax, which while Jaren Jackson is not eligible for that contract now, he could be eligible for it next summer if he doesn't sign an extension and like goes and makes all NBA or wins Defensive Player of the Year next year. And so there's a real question for Jaren of, do you want to take a huge contract now or like wait and try to get an even more huge contract next summer? There's also the question of, he said he wants to be in Memphis and I take him at his word, but does he want to be in Memphis, right? And so if you want to try to, which this happens in the NBA, if a player wants to try to move themselves somewhere else, this is sort of a pivot point to try to do it. And so I think if the Grizzlies could not get, I think the Grizzlies will pursue an extension. We both believe that. If they're not able to get that done this summer, I think that then opens up interesting questions. And I don't think there's a definite answer to those questions, but it opens up questions that they really got to take a hard look at.
Just to recap here, what is the advantage for Jaren in not taking this deal? Because this is more money than he would even get if they were to, depending on how much they clear, right? It has the potential to be more money than he could get as a unrestricted free agent next season, right? So is the freedom of choice of choosing where you are going to go play, is that the sole advantage to just saying no to any sort of extension?
Well, it's there's the prospect of the Supermax eligibility, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the 5th year, because the Grizzlies can only offer a 4-year extension. That's all they can do. A year from now, they could offer him a 5-year contract. And if the contracts are structured, unlike his last contract, which is structured to decline, most contracts are structured to increase. And so if it's conventionally structured, the big payday is the 5th year. But here's the thing, that 5th year is still going to be there. He just won't be able to lock it in. Like, in all possibility, Jaren Jackson at age 29 going into free agency again is going to get that huge contract. And, that money's almost certainly going to be there, but it's not definitely going to be there. So that's the thing, dude. How important is it to you to lock in the 5th year? Is locking in the 5th year worth waiting a year and taking the risk of something, happening that decreases your value over you look at what just happened to Jason Tatum, right? I think the Celtics would still sign Jason Tatum to a huge contract right now if they could, but stuff like that could happen and it could impact your value. And so it could be like, if you want to get somewhere else, that could be part of it, but it could be just wanting the 5th year, wanting to take the shot at all NBA, wanting to pursue the even bigger contract that could be there. But I think if the Grizzlies can get to that maximum offer, which and by my math and new money, it's about a $240 million in new money, which includes the extension plus the raise, right? If you don't do that, you go into free agency next summer, even if a team on the outside gives you the maximum offer they can, it's going to be less money than that. And even if the Grizzlies give you the max, not Supermax, we're assuming no Supermax, even if the Grizzlies give the max next summer over 4 years, it'll be less money because it'll be the same money over 4 years, but you want to pocket that raise. And so the most money Jaren Jackson can get from anybody on a 4-year deal, other than making Supermax, would come from the Grizzlies this summer.
Yeah. There's obviously so many different pieces to this.
There really is.
There really is.
There are a lot of spokes on the wheel, and I'll say that sometimes, like, I'm just ignoring half of it because, like, it probably doesn't matter, and like it's confusing enough already,
Yeah. Well, okay. I'm trying to simplify things for people that are listening that may not be as far into the weeds on NBA contract stuff. So, right. How long would this deal take him to, and how much money would he make if the Grizzlies are able to clear out to get to the max amount and give him an extension?
It would be it would be a 4-year extension, so 4 years after the current season. So it'd be 5 more seasons. So next season, whatever, I don't have the math in front of me, but next season's what, 24, 20, next season's 25, 26, right?
Yes, yeah.
So 4 more on top of that would be 27, 28, 29, 30. So that take you through 2030. So that'd be a 5-year deal, for a 4-year extension on top of 1 more year left. So that's 5 years total. Those 5 years would be a total of $240 million. It actually could be more than that if you want to give him more of a raise this season than you need to. But the raise that you would give him to hit the max extension number, that ends up being $240 million. So that's sort of the total money. Was that your question? I got
I just was curious. I know what it would be, but I think people would like to know. Yes, to up until the 2030 season, and it'd be what, roughly $240 million total.
$240 million in new money. So I'm adding that on top of the 23.4 he's already owed. So add 23.4 to that, and so it's more than that, right? It's you're getting close to 260, 270.
Yeah. I think the other part of this is, and again, there's so many twists and turns, is how this affects what the Grizzlies can spend this summer.
It's an interesting thing because you're having to use cap space to do a renegotiate and extend, which means you're having to clear out salary before you add the salary, right? You have to clear the cap space and you fill it up with the Jaren raise, right? Now they've already done the biggest part of that, which was moving the Marcus Smart contract and the trade deadline. But more than likely there's more work to do. But there's this odd thing where you're having to carve out so much space to make the renegotiate extend happen that then when you carve it out, you're only spending up to the cap line to do the Jaren renegotiate extend, which still leaves you a $30 million gap between the cap line and the tax line. Now, the Grizzlies have shown no willingness to go over the tax line, but they have shown a willingness to go up to the tax line. So, like, that leaves you $30 million in space, like, theoretically, to, like, do stuff for your team, but you limit your mechanisms and how to do it. You can't just go out and sign somebody for $30 million. And so if you go under the cap, it changes the free agency exceptions you have to use. So basically, what would happen in this situation is they would carve down money under the cap, use all the cap space to give Jaren a raise, and then give him an extension. Then at that point, you have a $30 million gap between the cap line and the tax line, but you only have access to the room exception in free agency, which is $8.8 million. They do have a trade exception, which those can be kind of hard to use, but they do have one of those. They have a couple of those. I think you only use one. That's like $7 million. Well, so if you used every bit of both of those things, that's like half of that extra money you can spend. You could re-sign Santi Aldama and go over the cap to do that, but you already have an $11 million cap hold. Like, you don't want to give him $30 million or whatever. And so you can do that. So, like, they're going to be in a situation where, like, they may, you can do trades where you take back more money, which they should really be looking to do, but you don't have a lot of tradable contracts because you're getting rid of those contracts, right?
Yeah.
You're getting rid of Marcus Smart, you're getting rid of John Conchar. Like, you don't really have those contracts to trade anymore. So they're going to have a situation where they're going to have a lot of money to theoretically spend under the tax, but not a lot of ways to actually do it.
Okay. I don't want to insult our listeners here, but that it remains complex. So what does that leave?
It's complex for everybody.
I know.
It's complex for me, and I'm the one sitting here trying to explain it.
The amount of time I've probably spent on the phone, even talking to you about this, is nuts. Just trying to get all of it sorted through. Let me just ask it this way: does this leave enough room for the Grizzlies to go out and add veteran players that it seems like everybody wants to do into this mix?
It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard for them to do what they probably want to do and what fans would want them to do, because $8.8 million is only going to get you so much. That's the largest free agency exception. Like, who is the best? I've been thinking about this. Who is the best player in free agency you can sign for $8.8 million? Like, I don't even know. Like, is it Kevon Looney? Like I don't think you can get Nickeil Alexander-Walker for $8.8 million, right?
No.
Can you get Karis LeVert for $8.8 million? You'd probably just stay in Atlanta for 10. I think it's hard to sign a meaningful player for $8.8 million. And if it's hard to sign a meaningful player for $8.8 million, it's going to be hard to use your trade exception of 7.1 to trade for a player, right? You can also, by the way, use these free agency exceptions now as trade exceptions. So in theory, they could trade for a player already under contract for that 8.8 million. But like, I have a hard time finding that too. The one thing you can do now is you can they loosened up the trade salary matching rules in the last CBA. That's one thing that did happen. So you can take back more money in a trade than you send out, but like a bigger gap than you used to if you're
What is
under
it,
these
125 now? 125%?
That's where it reaches. Like it's actually you can take back double up to I think it's 7.5 million. So if you like let's say instead of like disappearing John Conchar's money, they could keep him and trade him. They could trade John Conchar at 6.2 million and bring back someone who makes 12.4. And so there are things you can do in that regard. If you want to get super complicated about it and really go into
Oh, is that what we're doing now? Okay, good. We haven't been complicated enough yet. Let's just get super complicated.
There's a move the Grizzlies did a few years ago. This was John Hollinger will be on his deathbed talking about this transaction series that he conducted when he was with the Memphis Grizzlies. They wanted Matt Barnes, right? They had a trade exception. The trade exception was too small to take in Matt Barnes. It was like $1 million short because the trade exception, you can only take back that amount. There's no like 125%. There's none of that wiggle room, right? It's just a hard thing. So what they did was they used the trade exception. They traded for Luke Ridnour, who fit under the trade exception. And then they traded Luke Ridnour for Matt Barnes. And so if Matt Barnes, let's say, was $4 million, the trade exception is $4 million. Let's say Matt Barnes made $5 million. Well, you couldn't fit Matt Barnes into the trade exception, but if you had a $4 million player and you were able to take back more money in the trade for a player, you could trade the $4 million player for the $5 million player. So use the trade exception, take back the $4 million player, and then trade the $4 million player for the $5 million player, right? The Grizzlies could try to find stuff like that to do. If you're looking for ways to spend money, right? You have all this money to spend, you don't have ways to spend it. You could go to a team. I'm going to write this at some point because this will never happen. This may be me making stuff up. Go to a team that's got deep tax problems. Phoenix Suns. They have a guy, I think it's Cody Martin, one of the Martin twins, making $8.7 million under contract. That fits under your $8.8 million room exception, right? You could say, Phoenix, we'll take him off your books. You'll clear the $8.7 million. You'll save probably $40 million in tax money doing that. You give us Cody Martin. Now we have him for $8.7 million. We can trade him for a player making more than 15. And so, one thing you don't have to do that this summer, right? One thing I think if I'm the Grizzlies and I'll advocate for this, they should be looking to add contracts. Now, preferably you're adding contracts for players that would help you, but I'd be looking to sign somebody for $8.8 million. Even if he's a $4 million player, I'd sign him for 8.8 so I can have the tradable contract. Yeah. I think if they're going to clear out Marcus Smart, which they've already done, and clear out John Conchar, they don't have a lot of other like small to mid-sized contracts that are good for trade purposes to build trades. And one thing I would look to do this summer would not be, I'm going to solve all my problems in free agency. I'd try to, but even if I can't, I would try to add contracts that will be useful to me at the trade deadline. So if I'm the Grizzlies with an $8.8 million room exception and a $1 million trade exception, those are the two main ways I can add players this summer. I'm looking to add players with that money just so I can, if nothing else, like I hope I add players who solve my problems. But if nothing else, I'm adding players so I can try to trade them later.
The other thing is, we talked about renouncing the rights and sort of what that would mean. You're probably going to have some roster space, if I had to guess.
Right.
I'll be interested to see how they use it, right? Because, as you mentioned, they have limited tools. They're going to have open roster spots. I mean, we all think Cam Spencer's probably going to end up on the main roster, I think. That'll probably fill in one spot. But, I mean,
so
I don't know. I think it's interesting to see if they're going to fill every spot or if they're going to go into it with a little bit of space.
Well, you have to – rosters can either be 14 or 15 to start a season, right?
Yeah.
A lot of teams will carry 14. And I think the Grizzlies were going to do that last season, but then Jay Huff was so good, they went ahead and put him on the main roster. Otherwise, I think they probably would have stuck with 14. So there is that. I wouldn't be surprised if they stayed at 14 and kept an open roster spot. I am interested in. We've mentioned Jay Huff as a contract you might try to move if you need to clear additional space beyond the contract. I am interested in what the Grizzlies do or don't do this summer with Jay Huff, Gigi Jackson, and Vince Williams, because those are talented players on good contracts. But like those guys were like notably absent from the conversation at the final media session. All three of them were right.
Yep.
We're voluntarily mentioning Cam Spencer, and we're not talking about Jay Huff, Gigi Jackson, or Vince Williams. And so I'm interested to know what the team really thinks about those guys going forward. I've made my opinions clear about what I think about Vince Williams, right? A lot of people like have made their opinions clear about what they think about Gigi Jackson in a positive way. But I don't organizationally, I wonder about that. So we're talking about roster spots.
Yeah.
Like you're already subtracting the three guys who are unrestricted, right? You're subtracting Kennard, Bagley, Lamar Stevens. So that's three open roster spots. We're assuming they're going to move off the Conchar thing, right? So that's four open roster spots. You have to move Huff or somebody, maybe it's Gigi Jackson or Vince Williams. You have to move another guy to clear more salary. That's like a fifth open roster spot. But even if let's say you moved Huff just to move the money, I don't know. Like, what do they think about Vince and Gigi, right? So there could be a lot. There could be a lot of movement on the back half of the roster. I don't think there's going to be a lot of movement on the front half of the roster, but who knows? Maybe they'll surprise us.
Yeah. It's going to be fascinating to see how this plays out. I also think that there's the other contract thing, and we'll get into the finals in a little bit, but and maybe a little draft. I mean, we'll talk draft eventually, but um, there is the jaw extension that's in the universe too.
Yeah.
That doesn't have an immediate impact on this summer, but we talked about getting Jaren to go through 2030. You got the opportunity to pair those two together if you do a jaw extension. He would get what if he got an extension? And again, one thing we should clarify here: like none of this can happen until July 1st, when the new league year starts. So
Yeah,
like,
I think it's actually July 6th because there's a moratorium. I
okay,
think the
yeah, that's
actual
right.
pen to paper day is going to be July 6th.
So it's going to be July. So we're all going to be sitting around waiting to see what they're going to do. But that also looms, right? You could get Ja at more than 60 million a year, which is a big commitment, right?
Yeah,
For
I
two
think if
more
you
years.
if you max him out, which again we're talking about the 40% raise on the first extension year, right? I think if you maxed him out off of in terms of extending off the current contract, I think that's 120, maybe 128 over 2 years in additional money. Of course, you wonder about him and supermax eligibility, right?
Yep.
And so maybe there's a real question about whether same with the Jaren, like it's a two-sided coin. Like, what does the team want to do? What's the player want to do? With the team, I think there's a lot of. I mean, I've listened to some podcast stuff. I've read some stuff where people brought this up and said, "Well, they're probably not going to do that, or they shouldn't do that." And I have that instinct too, honestly, that like adding a 2-year extension to Ja 3 years from now, given his age curve and given his durability concerns, I would have some trepidation about that if I'm the Grizzlies. I sort of feel like the real peak years for John Morant may be the years you already have him under contract, these next three, not the fourth and fifth after that. But if you have a lot of belief in Morant, if you're the Grizzlies and you have a lot of belief in Morant beyond these next 3 years, maybe the reason you would want to do that is to lock him in because you think he is going to get supermax eligibility. And if you lock in him now, you lock him in without having to deal with that. So maybe that's the reason the Grizzlies might want to do that.
And if you're Ja, you haven't played the minimum amount of games. So like
ever. Not since your rookie year, right?
So
The 1 year he made All NBA was before that rule was instituted, and under that rule, he would not have made All NBA that season.
right, and so this is a chance to lock your money in now, right? Like I think that's
Yeah,
that's why if you're Ja, you strongly consider it. Now it doesn't matter how many games you play, but I
yeah,
think also there's an element to that too, and maybe this is overthinking it, but like we know from watching Ja that when Ja is at his peak, he's engaged with everything that's going on within the franchise. He's, and like it didn't feel like last season that was always the case. And like
right.
it came around and like, but the injury stuff he had to deal with mentally, he had other stuff going on. Like, I think that with by doing so and committing and like putting actions behind the verbal commitment that it seems that they've been willing to make, maybe you're going to get the peak form of Ja. That might be the mental element to it, of doing
Yeah,
some sort of
no,
extension.
I think we both think the odds of that happening this summer are much higher than has been portrayed elsewhere. I think it's been the degree it's been talked about or written about, and on ESPN today, you can find a little 2 paragraph thing about it. Their conclusion was that it won't happen. I think we both think the odds of it happening are a little bit higher.
Yeah. So that's the other thing that is out in the universe. I hope we didn't totally confuse everybody with all the Jaren talk, but we might have, you know?
It's unavoidable. I mean, the reality is, I totally. I mean, there are fans who love the Scheller stuff. You ever read my friend Matt Herdlicka? He gets deeper in the weeds, I think, than even the Grizzlies do on some of the stuff. And there are fans who hate it. I'm a little more towards I like thinking about it to a degree, but the reality is it's just inevitable. Like as a fan, you don't have to understand it. Like you can just take a pass on all that. Like that is your right as a fan. But if you want to understand why things do and don't happen in regard to roster management and player movement around the league, it is inevitable.
Do you think the Grizzlies will eventually go over the first apron? I got an email the other day, and I
They
still
gotta
think
they,
that
they gotta go over the tax itself before
I
they
know,
start
I
getting
know.
into
I'm
the
I'm
aprons.
saying eventually. I put eventually in front of there, Chris. There was an eventually in front of there on purpose, and I think that answer is like
Aprons,
once.
man. These dudes stay out of the kitchen, Drew. I hate to break it to you.
Listen, I got an email from somebody that was just looking at what the Timberwolves had done. This is when the Timberwolves were in the Western Conference Finals and said, look, the Timberwolves, they just sold out. They said, we got our team. We're selling out. We're going to put the best roster we can on the floor. We're going to go for it right
Yeah.
now. And we're going to deal with the consequences later. Is there any chance that the Grizzlies would ever
And,
consider that?
and they lost to a team that's under the tax, right? Who's now going to face another team in the NBA Finals who's under the tax completely. I don't know. It's always been my belief. Let me rephrase that. Belief is the wrong word. It's always well, belief is okay. Not a belief in what they will do, but a belief in what they should do, right? It's always been my belief that you should be willing to go into the tax when you're a good team.
I still don't think that they're
Period.
unwilling. I just think that if it's happening,
Well,
it's not happening this season,
I have
obviously.
reached the I'll believe it when I see it territory. I'm not saying that they won't. They've always said they will for the right situation, and there is evidence to suggest that they would for what they believe is the right situation. I think the real difference is their threshold for the right situation is higher than what mine has been. Would they go into the tax if they would have
Well,
been able
that's
to trade for
fair.
Kevin Durant a few years ago? Yeah.
That's
Um,
certainly fair. Yeah.
I think I would flip the coin on it, and I would say that I think their truth serum response on this would be a hope that this new system pushes enough teams out of that territory that you don't feel like you need to do that. Like, what are you proving, right? If Minnesota, if what Minnesota did becomes the wild exception, right? And now like nobody's going into the second apron. Like why would we? Like no one's doing this anymore, except for Steve Ballmer, right? Like if it becomes the thing where even the highest revenue, higher market teams are doing whatever they can to avoid the apron stuff, then that gives you cover if you're the Grizzlies or the Pacers or the whoever to avoid it too. So we'll see where it goes.
Yeah. No, that's true. I'm just thinking down the line. I'm thinking 2, 3 years from now, if the team is closer than they are now, Ja's on a bigger deal. Jaren is obviously on a bigger deal. You may run out of you may have to, like if you want to improve the team. That
No,
that
I agree, but again, you just went right past the tax line to the first apron. I want to see him pass the tax line first.
I know. I know. The NBA is one of the only leagues where you pay money to be good.
Yeah.
So I think I just found that question to be interesting, and I struggled in answering it. Somebody just sent me an email, so I sent an email back, but it was interesting. Okay, Chris. We have the finals matchup. It is the Thunder versus the Pacers. Before we jump all the way up to that, though, that Minnesota series was about as competitive as the Grizzlies series against the Thunder. Minnesota won a game, but like it felt like it was. maybe carbon copy is not the right word, but pretty similar to the way that the Grizzlies series
It
played.
had a very similar arc, minus a mid game injury of a best player, right?
Yeah,
because the unlike the Grizzlies, the Wolves won a game, and they won a game big. But if you believe, as I do, and I don't even think this is homerish belief, I just think it's, if you're watching the game, like the Grizzlies were going to win game 3 and going to win game 3 comfortably if Ja Morant doesn't get hurt. Now that does not mean they were going to win game 4 with Morant, even though it ended up being close. I think there's a good chance that Morant doesn't get hurt. It's the same arc. It's a 5-game Thunder win with the Grizzlies win one big at home. The Wolves also did not lose by 50, but they didn't play the Thunder in like game 1 of the playoffs when they were revved up and ready to go, right? They did lose both games 1 and 2 by double digits in OKC, and Frank lost all 3 games in OKC, by double digits. Got hammered in game 5. So I think qualitatively, not that big of a difference between the Grizzlies Thunder and Wolves Thunder.
I want just generally speaking, because I think the answer for me is yes. Does watching the Thunder play out the next 2 series make you feel better about the Grizzlies? Like, obviously, the Nuggets played them as competitively as anyone has so far, and probably more competitively than the Pacers will. It's my belief. But I think watching what Caruso did to Jokic in Game 7,
Yeah,
and comparing that to what he did to Jaren, and then just watching the way that the Thunder just totally dismissed the Timberwolves in the same manner which they dismissed the Grizzlies makes me feel better about what the state of the Grizzlies.
And then Caruso spent time on Julius Randle too in the next series, right?
Yeah.
That is something that I do think some people misread in the Grizzlies series about. I think some people looked at that and thought, oh, that's a good matchup for the Grizzlies. Why isn't Jaren taking advantage of this good matchup? Well, the Grizzlies didn't choose that matchup. The Thunder chose that matchup, right? They chose it for a reason. That was they believe the best way to defend with Caruso plus help on the big, and they kept doing that in other series. I think it didn't change my opinion, because my opinion was that kind of already there, and I think I expressed that on media day. Like when Zach Kleiman was doing the, we're not close thing, I thought that was overdone. I said that at the time. Like, I think that was a reaction to the immediacy of being hammered by the Thunder at the beginning of the playoffs, and before we had seen how the rest of the playoffs played out. And I thought that overstated the case in terms of the distance of the Grizzlies from the rest of the West, when 2 through 8 was in a pretty tight jumble, and the Grizzlies happened to be 8. So I always thought that. I do think the degree to which the Thunder, maybe I underrated a little bit how much better the Thunder were than everyone else. And we'll maybe going to find out more about that in these NBA finals. But I always thought that Thunder Grizzlies series overstated the case in terms of the Grizzlies' distance from contention.
I wonder if the Grizzlies or any other team in the West, for that matter, if they should or if they will operate under the idea that this Thunder team is not going anywhere, right? That's the scary thing about the Thunder, is that they are this juggernaut and they don't have to break up that team anytime soon. And so, do you make moves knowing that these next 2 years the Thunder are going to be this good? I don't know. I feel like that's a bet that doesn't always pay off, right? Players get hurt, circumstances change, but I wonder if they have to think about that.
There's 2 different ways to sort of approach that. Even if the answer is yes, that leads you down 2 potential paths. One of those is, thinking about your timeline and wait out the Thunder, right? Be the team that's good, that peaks 3 years from now when the Thunder are turning the corner, that kind of thing. Which I don't think the Grizzlies should be trying to do, given who their stars are and the ages of their stars. I think time should be now for the Grizzlies. The other way to look at that is, should we manage our team to make us better against the Thunder, right? The way the Knicks sort of reacted to the Celtics to try to make their team better against the Celtics, right? To go out and get OG Anunoby and get Mikal Bridges, and to try to manage their roster to make it better in a matchup with the Celtics, which worked against the Celtics, but maybe not as much against the Pacers. My answer is that I think the Grizzlies and other teams in the West should assume the Thunder are not going anywhere and they're the team to beat for the foreseeable future. But I don't think that the Grizzlies specifically should alter what they do based on that. I don't think you should try to alter your timeline because your timeline is now, right? The John Morant, Jaren Jackson, Desmond Bain, 25, 26 years old. There's no waiting for 3 years. Like, you be whatever you can be now. And then I just wouldn't think that much about the matchup because the reality is Thunder are going to be the prohibitive favorite. Like, someone's got to make the conference finals to play them, and like, it'd be awesome to be in the conference finals, right? The Grizzlies have only done that once in franchise history. And once you're in the conference finals, you never know what's going to happen. Even if they're way better than you, like somebody turns an ankle, whatever. And so I would just try to make your team as good as you can make your team and just go as far as you can with it, right? And not worry too much about the Thunder.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's what they should do. But I do wonder if other teams in the West are going to take a different approach than that. I think
if you're Portland, if you're Houston, if you're San Antonio, and you can see a path where we could push all in hard right now, or we could slow go it a little bit and maybe we peak in 2 or 3 years. I think those are teams that could make those decisions, right?
Yep.
You know, when you have Wemby, are you going to go out and try to add Giannis? Or are you going to try to think about, well, we're adding the number 2 pick and like we're really going to peak in 3 years, right? If you're Portland, or you showed some growth last year, are you in a hurry? Or are you like, let's let it marinate? And Houston's a big one too, right? Yeah, they got Vince and Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks, but they could also think about, we're really in a Min Thompson, Reed Shepherd, like Alperen Şengün team that we got time to let that grow together.
Yeah. One thing we've talked about, I think, in the past, I think we talked about it on the podcast. I know we've at least talked about it at some point, is that it feels like the Grizzlies, at least in the conference finals, they most closely aligned positionally and maybe positionally is probably the right word there with the Pacers than any other team that made the conference finals. Just because they had the star point guard, the scoring power forward, who's a little bit slighter frame than some of the other more bruising players. And then here the Pacers are, they beat the Knicks. They're in the finals, and they're playing against a team in the Thunder and they beat a team in the Knicks that had all these defensive wings on their team, whether it was Bridges and Anunoby, 2 guys that the Grizzlies had reported interest in trading for. And the Grizzlies probably went into the season thinking, well, we've got Vince, we've got Scotty, we've got Marcus Smart, we've got these long defenders, or not, I wouldn't even say long. Some of those guys are undersized, but we've got perimeter defenders, multiple of them that we can throw at opponents, and we can play that style of basketball. But in the end, that wasn't the style of basketball that they played. Probably more closely resembled the Pacers. And I wonder if going forward, how they decide to build the team. Because you can say, yeah, they still need a defensive wing. They still need a veteran defensive wing, and maybe that would have been good enough to put them over the hump this year. But they also just hired a coach full-time who's like clearly an offensive mind, right?
Right.
And I just wonder what direction they go. Like, there are going to be other teams in the NBA that are going to follow the Thunder model, and they're going to try to build a team that can play that way, the same way teams tried to build the Golden State model back in the day. I don't know which direction the Grizzlies are going to go for sure, from here forward, what type of team they're going to try to build.
Well, there's a lot of different components or sort of attributes that come together to make up the way a team plays. I mean, one of those is your roster makeup. One of those is how you deploy your roster in terms of like how deep your rotation is and that kind of thing. Another is kind of the pace you play at. And then there's like the actual like schematic style, right? Like you can be a fast-paced team that plays a lot of pick and roll. You can be a slow team that plays a lot of pick and roll, right? You could be a team that plays a 10-man rotation that plays a lot of pick and roll. It could be a team that plays a 7-man rotation that plays a lot of pick and roll. So it's like you're having to choose, a philosophy from each of those different boxes and sort of put them together a little bit. What I'm struck by, and I wrote about this I think yesterday, the piece went up, about this Pacers Thunder finals and kind of what you can draw from that as a Grizzlies person. And I had like 4 different things, but the thing that is most interesting to me is that there are ways in which those teams are stylistically similar to each other and also stylistically similar to the Grizzlies, at least the Grizzlies earlier in the season, in terms of pace and depth. These are all three teams that played deep rotations, that limited the upside of their star minutes, and that played super fast. Now, the Grizzlies went above and beyond on the star minutes thing. The Pacers and the Thunder are towards the bottom of the league in terms of the total minutes per games their top three players play, and they're still nowhere close to the Grizzlies. So I think the Grizzlies went overboard on that. But if you're Thomas Isolo, I got to get back into my
Thomas
Isolo. I got to get more reps in. To me, you can look at this matchup in the finals of the Thunder and Pacers and see that as a ratification of your general philosophy of pace, depth, and intensity. And now the Grizzlies went away from that late in the season. They went away from that partly because it wasn't working and partly because they lost their depth, man. I mean, if you look at the Grizzlies early in the season versus playoffs, you basically subtracted, let's say Marcus Smart and Vince Williams was kind of a wash, right? You basically subtracted Jake LaRavia, Brandon Clark, and Jalen Wells while adding Gigi Jackson. And so they didn't have the functional depth by the time they get in the playoffs they had early. When you look at the Pacers and the Thunder, they're playing 9-10 man rotations in the playoffs, man. And they're playing fast. People say the playoffs slow down. These teams are not slowing down. They're playing the same pace as they did in the regular season. So I think the Grizzlies can look at that and say, Isolo specifically can look at that and say, yeah, I went away from my own philosophy because it wasn't working, but I'm going to go back to it now that I'm the head coach. And we're going to play really fast. We're going to play a 10-man rotation. We're going to play intense all the time, and we're going to make it work because guess what? The two teams in the NBA Finals both play that way. Now, there are differences between the Thunder and the Pacers and differences with the Grizzlies. The Thunder are more of a defense team, and the Pacers are more of an offense team, right? So there's different variations even within that pace and intensity. But I think if you're the Grizzlies, the two things I look at and say, like, what are the differences? How do you close the gap? Part of it is health, and you can't control that, right? Having Ja Morant on the floor. But the two things I think you can try to control, one is turnovers, and the other is defense.
Definitely.
And the other is defense. And so I would be looking from a schematic standpoint to try to limit the turnovers and make that a priority to not be a high turnover team next season. Can you play fast without turning the ball over? Guess what? The Thunder and the Pacers do. Let's do that too. And I think they have to be better defensively. And I don't think that's just about scheme. I think that's about personnel. And that's one of the reasons they're not going to bring Luke Kennard back, right? You got to start subtracting bad defenders from the team. And they're going to, it's good of a shooter as Kennard is. I think they have determined that he doesn't get shots off. And so he doesn't make up what you lose on defense as much. I think they're going to take a hard look at Jay Huff and Gigi Jackson.
We can I was going to say, we can talk about this for a while. Like Gigi is a big conundrum because he has the athleticism and size to play defense, but right now he is not a good defender. So, I think if he's in summer league, which I think we expect he will be, that's something certainly to watch.
Right.
So they might, you're right. I think that is the case. They're going to have to take a hard look at who's capable on that end of the court, I don't know what direction they're going to go, but let me pose it to you this way. How different is the direction of this team now than it was when they traded for Marcus Smart? The vision has to be slightly different, right? I mean, or is it the same?
It's interesting. I'm trying to rewind back to what the situation of the team was at that point. Right?
That's when they got off with Steven Adams.
Yeah. I think getting Edey. I think the selection of Zach Edey really nails into place some stuff about what they want to do. And it's funny to talk about pace and intensity, and you got the 7'5", 300-pound dude at center. But I think they don't see that as an issue, and I tend to agree because Edey's not going to lead breaks. He's going to start them with defensive rebounding and shot blocking, right? And then the fact that he can hit a trail three at the end of it. I don't think they see Edey as we want to play fast, but we have Zach Edey. I don't think they see that as a conflict. I think they see that would work. But I think having Edey sort of does things for how you want to play defensively. It does things for how you want to play at half court. Like you're not going to have that guy and not play certain ways. And one of the tensions early last season was they had that guy and they weren't playing the ways that you would dictate the way you want to play with that guy. That's part of the reason why I think there's been a coaching change, right? And it's not that Edie is more important than John Morant or Desmond Bain or Jaren Jackson. He's obviously not, but he dictates certain things about the way you're going to play more so than those guys are. Because we know Jaren can play any which way you want, right? I think the style they're going to play is going to be geared more around their dedication to John Morant and Zach Edey, because merely having those guys in important roles dictates certain things stylistically. But I don't think, even though they're going to do a lot more pick and roll stuff and half court basketball, I think the commitment to pace and depth, I think they're going to go right back to that next season under Isola.
Yeah, I would be surprised if they didn't. I do. I mean, I think it's notable though that they hired a coach that's offensive minded. You know?
No, that's a real question. I had a mailbag question about that, and I included the question even though I didn't have a good answer. I almost didn't include it because I didn't have a good answer, but I decided it was such a good question we needed to like put a pin in this publicly, like maybe for me and you as much as for anyone else. Like this is something we need to get into. Like, what does it mean? What is Isola's defensive philosophy? What's he going to do defensively? Because
He hasn't talked much about that at all.
He hasn't. And this brings up something I think we haven't talked about recently, but it's another thing. Like for the summer, like at some point they're going to fill out that coaching staff, and that'll be an interesting thing to look for too.
Yeah, yeah. It's I think that the wheels will get turning on that this month. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. And like I said, summer league has the potential to be fun. We're about a month away from that, a month away from the draft. When we talked about real quick, two things real quick, and then we'll get out of here because we've been talking a while already. But I when we talked about the roster space and like how they're going to fill it, and I know I had a conversation with you on the phone a week ago. We were talking about like, will they use draft picks on two-way spots? I wondered out loud, like, because when you talk about players that get drafted into two-way spots, if the Grizzlies were to do that, this is all totally hypothetical, right?
Right.
Like a lot of times, those players are players that are surprising that they stayed in the draft because they feel like they're going to get a two-way contract. That like because of the money in college basketball now, right? And what players know that they can go back to, those back end of the draft players are either players that are out of eligibility or players that feel like they're almost certain to get a shot. And so I think the players that might stay in the draft when people thought they were going to go back to college are players that might be candidates for the Grizzlies because of the situation. And I did find it interesting. Like, I went back and did some digging to figure out who those players are. Jameer Watkins and RJ Lewis. RJ Lewis, St. John's.
The RJ Lewis, when you were talking, that's the guy who popped in my head.
Right.
It's an example of what you're talking about. Yeah.
Like those guys that like could have gone back to school, could have made a big payday, but stayed in the draft. They probably think that they know they're going to get some sort of opportunity somewhere. Like the Grizzlies, knowing that they may not, that they don't want to add rookies, like they could draft and stash. They could add players to two-way contracts. Like those guys I'm going to keep an eye on just because it feels like interests may align there. So I found that interesting, just something I wanted to throw out there.
I mean, my guess would be, and it's just pure educated guess, but if they keep the picks, I think what's it, 48 and 56, my guess is that pick 48 is like a college player who will be on a two-way.
Yeah.
And like pick 56 is a drafted stash.
Probably.
That would be my guess.
Yeah. So we'll see what happens there. We'll have more time to talk about the draft real quick. The finals. Do you give the Pacers any shot?
Man, I'd like to. I'm rooting for the Pacers, but I'm also expecting to be disappointed. My son is just he's gotten really into the playoffs this year, and it's just like every series he's rooting for the team that loses. Like he was rooting hard for the Knicks, and he was rooting hard for the Wolves, and like those both went down, and now he's rooting for the Pacers, and like it's just going to be disappointment like every series basically. So I do believe the Pacers are better equipped to give the Thunder a battle than the Knicks would have been. but I don't. I can't bring my. I mean, I really have to predict. I think I have to predict Thunder in 5, man.
Yeah, no,
I just
I'm
think
with you.
they just got too much.
I'm with you. I think Thunder in 5, but I changed my opinion because I thought that it was going to be the Knicks that would give the Thunder the best series. But then I watched. It's just so much dribble, dribble, dribble with
Yeah,
Brunson.
that was my
I
thing.
changed my opinion about halfway through that series. I was like, you know what? I think the Pacers will give them a better
And
series.
it's not that the
So
Pacers aren't dependent on Halliburton, but I think there's two differences. One, they're less dependent on Halliburton because they have more of a ball handler in the backcourt with Nimhard. I think Siakam is a little bit more of a creator with the ball than the Wolves front court people. They have like a real point guard off the bench in McConnell. They at least some other guys you can go to create offense. Whereas I think the Knicks were so dependent on dribble, dribble, dribble Jalen Brunson. And then like Halliburton is like the most like low turnover. He's the lowest turnover elite point guard in basketball, right? And so I think that's why I think the Pacers are better equipped to like hang a little bit. But I don't know that they're super well equipped.
yeah, unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be highly competitive, but we will see. All right, we'll be back to discuss more Grizzlies stuff probably next week. And then we'll eventually do some sort of draft setup pod and talk about some prospects that we like at the top of the draft, even though the Grizzlies don't have any picks at the top of the draft, and then some late guys that we think
This is going
we
to
should
be
have
the
an eye on.
biggest like crash course to pretend I know what I'm talking about in draft content history for me.
It
But
is so,
I'm going to
I
do it.
know, it's so hard to predict those second round guys, especially back end of the second round. I mean, it just feels like the odds of you nailing some player that the team is interested in is so low. But I don't know. That's why you look for angles, right? That's the angle. I think the early angle is I'm looking for somebody that they might be interested in putting on a two-way deal, and maybe that's a guy that no one thought would be in the draft. So, all right. Well, that'll do it for us this week. As I mentioned, we'll be back. Go read Chris's piece about the finals and some comparisons to the Grizzlies and what they could have learned up to this point. I'll have some Grizzlies stuff later on this week, including a feature story that I'm pretty excited about. So make sure you go check all that out. But for Drew and for Chris, we're out of here.